When the Johnson family moved into Maplewood Heights, the neighborhood looked exactly like the kind of place people described as perfect. Clean streets curved between large houses with trimmed lawns and white fences. Children rode bicycles safely while neighbors waved politely from their porches. It felt peaceful and welcoming from the outside. For David Johnson, it represented something deeper. It was proof that years of hard work had finally given his family stability. David worked as a structural engineer while his wife Angela ran a successful online interior design business. Together they saved 4 years to buy a home where their 2 children could grow up safely. Maplewood Heights was known as one of the best suburbs outside Atlanta, with excellent schools and quiet surroundings. The moving truck arrived early Saturday morning. David carried boxers into the house while Angela directed movers inside. Their children laughed excitedly as they explored the backyard. At first everything seemed normal. A woman from across the street watched from her window longer than expected. Another neighbor slowed his car while driving past, staring carefully at the activity. David noticed but assumed curiosity was natural whenever someone new arrived. Later that afternoon, David walked next door to introduce himself. The man who opened the door smiled politely, but his friendliness felt forced. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said quickly before ending the conversation within seconds. David returned home slightly confused but hopeful things would improve once people got to know them. During the first week, small incidents began happening. A police car slowly drove past their house one evening, then returned again an hour later. The officer claimed someone reported loud noise, even though the family had been quietly eating dinner. A few days later, another complaint came about trash bins being placed incorrectly, even though David followed neighborhood guidelines exactly. Angela tried to stay positive. "Maybe people just like strict rules here," she said gently. But David sensed something else. One evening, while watering the lawn, he overheard 2 neighbors talking near the sidewalk. "I just think we should keep an eye on things," one whispered. The words stayed with him long after they walked away. Despite the tension, the Johnson family continued building their life. Angela decorated the home beautifully while the children quickly made friends at school. David focused on work, hoping time would ease the uncomfortable atmosphere. Instead, complaints increased. Someone reported their car parked on the street overnight. Another neighbor claimed unfamiliar visitors came too often, even though they were simply relatives helping them settle in. The homeowners association sent warning emails that felt unusually strict compared to other residents. Angela finally admitted what both of them were thinking. "It feels like they do not want us here." David did not answer immediately because saying it aloud made it real. One Friday evening, everything changed. The Johnson family hosted a small birthday gathering for their daughter. Only close relatives attended. Music played softly inside while children laughed in the backyard. At 8:30, flashing red lights appeared outside. Police officers approached the house, responding to another complaint about excessive noise and suspicious activity. David stepped outside calmly, explaining it was a family birthday dinner. Officers quickly realized nothing was wrong and apologized before leaving. Across the street, several neighbors watched openly from their driveways. That night, Angela sat quietly after guests left. "How many times will this keep happening?" she asked. David had no answer. Weeks later, tension reached its peak during a neighborhood meeting. Several residents complained indirectly about maintaining community standards while repeatedly glancing toward the Johnson family. David stood and spoke calmly. "We moved here because we wanted to be part of this community," he said. "We follow every rule and respect everyone here." The room fell silent, but no one responded directly. The feeling of isolation grew heavier after that. Then came the night no one would forget. It was late autumn, and cold winds moved through Maplewood Heights. Around midnight, David woke to a faint cracking sound outside. At first he thought it was thunder, but then he smelled smoke. He rushed to the window and saw orange light glowing from the house 2 doors down. Fire! David immediately ran outside, shouting for Angela to call emergency services. Flames spread quickly along the side of the neighbor's garage, climbing toward the roof. Without hesitation, David ran toward the burning house. He pounded on the front door, yelling for the family inside to wake up. No response came at first. Smoke thickened rapidly. He circled toward a side window and heard coughing inside. Using a garden stone, he broke the glass and shouted again. A frightened couple appeared, carrying their young child. David helped them climb out, safely one by one. The fire grew louder as flames consumed part of the structure. Another neighbor screamed that an elderly woman lived in the upstairs bedroom. Ignoring fear, David ran back toward the house, covering his mouth with his sleeve. Smoke burned his eyes as he rushed inside, following faint cries for help. He found the woman disoriented near the staircase, unable to move quickly. "Stay with me," he said, guiding her carefully toward the exit. Moments after they escaped, part of the roof collapsed behind them. Sirens filled the neighborhood as firefighters arrived and took control of the scene. Residents gathered outside, watching in shock. The same neighbors who once filed complaints now stared at David, covered in ash and smoke, standing beside the family he had saved. Paramedics checked him for injuries while the rescued family thanked him repeatedly through tears. One of the neighbors who had complained most often approached slowly. "We did not know anyone was still inside," she said quietly. David nodded, catching his breath. "I just did what anyone should do." But everyone knew not everyone would have run into danger without hesitation. News about the fire spread quickly through local media after witnesses described David's actions. Interviews highlighted how he saved multiple lives before emergency crews arrived. The neighborhood atmosphere changed almost overnight. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted the Johnson family warmly. Neighbors delivered meals to the displaced family and publicly thanked David for his bravery. At the next neighborhood meeting, the Homeowners Association president stood and addressed the community. "We failed to welcome this family properly," he admitted, "and we must do better moving forward." Applause followed as many residents nodded in agreement. One by one, neighbors approached David and Angela offering sincere apologies. Some admitted fear and assumptions influenced their earlier behavior. Angela listened quietly while holding David's hand. Months later, Maplewood Heights felt completely different. Children played together freely and neighbors stopped by simply to talk. Trust slowly replaced suspicion. The family whose house burned rebuilt with support from the entire community. They often reminded others that they were alive because David acted without hesitation. One evening, David stood in his front yard watching the sunset while neighbors chatted nearby. The same streets that once felt cold now felt welcoming. Angela joined him, smiling softly. "Feels different now," she said. David nodded. People change when they truly see each other. The journey had not been easy, but it revealed something powerful. Courage has a way of breaking barriers that words alone cannot. The neighborhood that once questioned their presence had become a place where understanding finally grew, and the complaint that began with suspicion ended by bringing an entire community closer together. In the weeks after the fire, the Johnson family experienced something they had not felt since moving into Maplewood Heights: quiet acceptance. The neighborhood that once watched them with suspicion now stopped by daily, asking how they were doing. Plates of homemade food appeared at their doorstep. Children knocked, asking if David's son could come outside to play. Small gestures slowly replaced the tension that had once filled every interaction. Yet for David, the emotional shift was complicated. He appreciated the kindness, but part of him still remembered the nights when police cars arrived because of unnecessary complaints. He remembered Angela pretending not to notice, neighbors avoiding eye contact at the grocery store. Trust did not rebuild as quickly as burned houses. One afternoon, David visited the temporary housing where the rescued family was staying. Mark and Lisa Reynolds welcomed him warmly. Their young daughter ran toward him and hugged his leg without hesitation. "Mom says you're the reason we are safe," she said proudly. David smiled gently, unsure how to respond to such pure gratitude. Inside the apartment, Lisa explained how quickly the fire had spread. An electrical fault in the garage ignited stored materials, and flames reached the house before smoke alarms fully activated. She admitted that without David knocking on the door, they might not have woken in time. "You did not just save our house," she said quietly. "You saved our lives." David nodded but changed the subject. He never felt comfortable being called a hero. To him, the decision to help had not been heroic. It had been instinct. Meanwhile, news coverage continued drawing attention to this story. Local reporters interviewed neighbors who openly admitted the community had judged the Johnson family unfairly before truly knowing them. Some interviews were difficult for David and Angela to watch. Hearing people acknowledge their past behavior brought both relief and lingering sadness. Angela noticed the emotional weight on David one evening as they sat on the porch. "You keep thinking about before the fire," she said gently. He sighed. "I want to believe things changed for the right reasons. Not just because something dramatic happened." Angela understood. Real acceptance should not require proof through danger or sacrifice. But school, their children experienced changes too. Teachers spoke proudly about David's bravery and classmates treated them differently. Their daughter came home one day saying her friends called her dad a superhero. David knelt beside her and smiled. "I am just someone who helped when help was needed," he told her. "Anyone can do that." But later that night, he wondered privately whether everyone truly believed that. As rebuilding began on the damaged house, the neighborhood organized volunteer weekends. Residents worked together, clearing debris and repainting fences. David joined quietly, carrying lumber and tools alongside neighbors who once filed complaints against him. During one workday, an older neighbor named Mr. Collins approached him hesitantly. "I owe you honesty," he said. "When you first moved here, I made assumptions. I thought you did not belong because you were different from what I was used to seeing here." David listened calmly. Mr. Collins continued, speaking with visible regret. "That night you ran into the fire, I realized character has nothing to do with background. I am sorry it took something so serious for me to understand." David appreciated the sincerity. "What matters is what we do after learning," he replied. The conversation spread quietly through the community. More neighbors began sharing similar reflections. The fire had forced many people to confront biases they never openly acknowledged before. The Homeowners Association introduced new welcome programs for incoming families. Instead of strict rule enforcement as a first interaction, they organized neighborhood gatherings designed to help residents know each other personally. Angela volunteered to help plan events, using her design skills, creating warm, inviting spaces where conversations flowed naturally. Slowly, Maplewood Heights began feeling like the community it always claimed to be. One evening, several months later, the neighborhood hosted a block party celebrating completion of the Reynolds family rebuilt home. String lights stretched across driveways, while music played softly and children ran between houses laughing. David stood near the grill talking with neighbors when Mark Reynolds raised a glass to get everyone's attention. "There are moments that define a community," he said. "The night of the fire showed us who we want to be moving forward." He turned toward David. "You reminded us what real neighbor means." Applause filled the street. David felt slightly embarrassed but also hopeful. The recognition no longer felt uncomfortable because it came from genuine connection rather than sudden attention. As the evening continued, Angela watched families laughing together and whispered to David, "This finally feels like home." He nodded, realizing she was right. Yet the experience also changed David personally. He began volunteering with local emergency preparedness programs, teaching families basic fire safety and response planning. He wanted others to feel empowered instead of helpless during crises. During one workshop, a participant asked why he chose to help people who had treated him unfairly. David paused thoughtfully before answering. "Because emergencies revealed who we choose to be, not who others expect us to be." The answer stayed with many who attended. Winter arrived, bringing colder weather and quieter streets. Snow covered rooftops, creating a peaceful scene very different from the chaos of the fire months earlier. One night, David walked outside alone, watching soft flakes fall under lights. He realized the anger he once carried had slowly faded. Not because the past disappeared, but because growth replaced resentment. The neighborhood had changed, and so had he. Angela joined him, wrapping a scarf around her neck. "You are thinking again," she said with a smile, "just remembering how different everything felt when we first arrived." She looked down the street where warm lights glowed from nearby homes. "Sometimes people need a moment that forces them to see clearly," she said. David agreed. The fire had not only saved lives, it had burned away invisible barriers that separated neighbors from each other. Spring arrived soon after, bringing renewed energy. Gardens bloomed and children played outside again. The Johnson family hosted their first neighborhood barbecue and nearly everyone attended. Laughter filled the backyard where tension once lived. At one point, David stepped back, observing conversations happening naturally between families who barely spoke months earlier. He realized change had become permanent because it grew through shared experiences rather than obligation. Later that evening, the same neighbor who once called police over minor complaints approached David holding a plate of food. "I used to watch your house looking for problems," she admitted quietly. "Now I watch because I feel lucky you live next door." David smiled warmly, accepting the honesty. "We all get second chances," he said. As sunset painted the sky orange and gold, David felt a sense of peace he had not expected when moving to Maplewood Heights. The journey from suspicion to trust had been painful, but meaningful. He understood something important now. Communities are not defined by perfect beginnings, but by how people choose to grow after facing their mistakes. The complaint that once symbolized rejection had transformed into connection. Neighbors who once doubted his presence now relied on his friendship. Children who witnessed division now grew up seeing cooperation. Standing in his backyard, surrounded by conversation and laughter, David realized the fire changed more than one night. It changed perspective. And sometimes the strongest foundations are not built when everything goes right, but when people learn to rebuild together after realizing how wrong they once were. The Johnson family had come searching for a home. In the end, they helped an entire neighborhood learn how to become one.